wind came first across the open range, long before the riders appeared. It moved over dry grass, through split-rail fences, across a yard where a water trough had cracked from years of sun and hard use. On the western frontier, a ranch was never only a home. It was a claim against hunger, weather, debt, and violence. It was a line drawn into land that had already seen older peoples driven away, new settlers arrive, and powerful men decide that possession often mattered more than justice. By the late 19th century, across many parts of the American West, land was the foundation of survival and conflict. A small ranch could represent years of labor, posts cut by hand, wells dug with blistered palms, livestock guarded through winter, and a house raised plank by plank against the emptiness. But paper deeds and government records did not always protect those who held them. In remote counties, the law moved slowly. Sheriffs depended on local politics. Judges could be distant, intimidated, or bought. In such places, a widow alone on good land could become a target. Her name was remembered in fragments, as many frontier names were. Some accounts called her Martha Bell. Others gave her no surname at all, only the widow on the North Creek. Whether the exact details survived cleanly or were worn down by years of retelling, the shape of the story belonged to a world that was very real. She had come west with a husband who believed cattle, water, and endurance might build a future. Together, they had taken a modest claim near a bend of creek water, not rich by Eastern standards, but valuable in a dry country where grass and water decided who prospered and who failed. The ranch was small enough to be worked by a family, but well placed enough to draw attention. It sat between a stage road and grazing country that larger cattle interests wanted to control. Its spring ran even in dry months. Its low pasture could carry animals when neighboring flats yellowed under drought. To a widow trying to survive, it was shelter and inheritance. To men with money and armed hands, it was an obstacle. Her husband had died before the trouble reached its worst point. Some said fever took him after a winter of exposure. Others believed he had been injured driving cattle through flooded ground and never recovered. Death on the frontier was often ordinary and sudden, stripped of ceremony by distance. A grave behind a house, a Bible with a pressed flower, a rifle hung near the door. These were the monuments left to families who had little time for mourning. After his death, the widow stayed. That choice alone was an act of defiance. She kept the ranch going with hired help when she could afford it, and with her own hands when she could not. She rose before dawn to tend chickens, mend harness, check fences, and watch the horizon. The work of survival did not pause because grief had entered the house. She patched the roof after storms. She bargained for flour and coffee in town. She learned which travelers could be trusted and which men smiled too easily. Her husband's coat still hung by the door, fading in the dust, but the land did not wait for memory. The men who wanted the ranch did not begin with open violence. Rarely did such campaigns begin that way. First came offers below value, delivered with false politeness. Then came warnings about debt, taxes, grazing rights, and survey lines. A lawyer in town suggested that her claim might not be as secure as she believed. A cattle foreman hinted that accidents happened when lonely people refused reasonable arrangements. The widow listened, understood, and refused. At the center of the pressure stood a ranching boss, whose name carried weight in the county. In some versions, he was called Harlan Creed, a man who had arrived poor and grown rich by taking advantage of every gap between law and force. His cattle ranged widely. His brand was burned into hundreds, perhaps thousands of animals. He employed riders who knew how to cut fences, scatter stock, and deliver messages without leaving signatures. Men like him were not unusual in the cattle regions of the West. They did not always wear villainy plainly. They served on committees, donated to churches, shook hands with officials, and made themselves necessary. Creed's ambition depended on controlling movement, the creek, the road, the grazing corridors. The widow's ranch broke the continuity of his land. Her fences forced his cattle around. Her spring could not be used without permission. Her refusal became more than personal resistance. It became a public weakness in his authority. In a country where reputation was currency, one small woman holding out against a powerful man could be dangerous. The first fence was cut in the night. She found the wires down at dawn. Cattle tracks mixed in the mud near the creek. A section of pasture had been trampled. 2 calves were missing. No one in town saw anything. The second warning came when a hired hand quit after being stopped on the road by 3 armed riders. He left his wages behind and rode east before sunset. The widow did not blame him. Fear was one of the tools by which land changed hands. Then came the fire. It did not take the house, but it took the hay shed. Flames rose orange against the black sky, feeding on months of stored feed. The widow hauled water until her arms shook, smoke burning her eyes, sparks catching in her skirt. By morning, winter security had become ash. A neighbor rode over late, looked at the ruins, and said little. In such places, silence could be sympathy, but it could also be surrender. The widow went to the sheriff. He heard her complaint, wrote something down, and advised caution. There was no proof, he said. No witness willing to speak. No man to arrest on rumor. His words were not entirely false, but they were not justice either. Frontier law often depended less on statutes than on who could safely accuse whom. The widow returned to the ranch with the knowledge that no badge was coming to stand between her and the men who wanted her gone. By then, word of the dispute had moved through the country. It traveled at water stops, in saloons, at blacksmith shops, and along the stage route. The widow's refusal became a story people repeated in lowered voices. Some admired her. Others called her stubborn. Many pitied her, which was another form of abandonment. But one listener did not speak at all. He was a stranger who had come through town days before, riding a lean horse with a worn saddle and no visible brand on his gear. He gave no name at the livery. He paid cash for oats and coffee. His coat was dark, his hat plain, his beard rough enough to hide age. He carried himself like a man who had learned to be unseen until being seen was useful. In frontier towns, such men were not rare, but this one drew notice because he seemed to leave no story behind him. Some said he had been a soldier. Others thought he had ridden as a scout, a lawman, an outlaw, or all three at different times. The West produced men whose pasts were too violent, too painful, or too compromised to explain. The Civil War had scattered veterans across the plains. Indian wars, range wars, railroad camps, mining towns, and border violence had hardened thousands. A man could cross 2 territories and become someone else, provided no one asked too carefully. He heard about the widow at a table in the back of a saloon, where cattle hands were laughing too loudly. One of them described how long it would take before she broke. Another said women alone always broke, one way or another. The stranger did not look up. He finished his coffee, placed coins on the table, and left. That afternoon, he rode north. The widow saw him before he reached the yard. Living alone had taught her to notice dust, speed, posture, and the way a man's hand rested near his weapon. She stood on the porch with a shotgun lowered, but ready. The stranger stopped well short of the house. He removed his hat, not dramatically, but with the plain manners of someone who understood distance and fear. He asked for water. She watched him for a long moment before pointing toward the pump. He drank, filled his canteen, and thanked her. When he looked toward the burned hay shed, he did not ask questions. That restraint mattered. People who had suffered violence often met curiosity as another intrusion. Before leaving, he told her the south fence would not hold another night if men came with wire cutters. She asked how he knew men were coming. He said men who wanted land rarely stopped after burning feed. Then he mounted and rode to the edge of the property, where he made camp beneath a cottonwood, not close enough to threaten, not far enough to be useless. At dusk, 3 riders approached the fence. They came without lanterns, confident in the dark. The stranger waited until they dismounted. When the first man bent toward the wire, a voice came from the shadow, calm and close enough to freeze him. The stranger told them to leave the fence alone. One rider laughed and asked who he was. The answer, if one was given, did not survive in any reliable telling. What survived was the sound of a revolver being cocked, and the sudden understanding that the widow was no longer alone. No shots were fired that night. The riders withdrew, angry but uncertain. Violence depended on confidence, and confidence could be broken by one unknown man who did not scare easily. By morning, the widow found the fence untouched and the stranger gone from the cottonwood. He had ridden the perimeter before sunrise, reading tracks, checking low ground, studying the approaches as though the ranch had become a battlefield. The conflict now changed shape. Creed's men had expected isolation. Instead, they found resistance organized by someone who understood their methods. The stranger repaired weak sections of fence, moved livestock closer to the house, and showed the widow how to position lanterns at night so movement in the yard would cast long shadows. He did not promise safety. He did not speak of vengeance. He acted with the economy of a man who knew fear was best answered by preparation. In town, the presence of the nameless gunman unsettled those who had grown comfortable with the widow's helplessness. Men who had joked about her situation now watched the saloon doors more carefully. Creed's foreman asked questions at the livery. No one had answers. That lack of information became a weapon of its own. A known enemy could be measured. An unknown man carried every rumor ever told about deadly strangers. Creed could still have chosen another path. He could have waited, gone to court, increased pressure through creditors, or let the widow spend herself into exhaustion. But power, when challenged publicly, often becomes impatient. The longer she remained, the more his authority seemed incomplete. The stranger had not merely defended a fence. He had made Creed look uncertain. The raid came before dawn, 2 days later. A low fog lay over the creek bottom, and the horses moved through it like shapes cut from gray cloth. 5 riders came from the west pasture, where a dry wash hid their approach. Their plan was simple: drive off the widow's remaining cattle, burn the barn, and force her into a sale she could no longer refuse. Such acts were not battlefield heroics. They were economic warfare. Destroy feed, scatter animals, intimidate labor, and the landowner's legal claim became meaningless. The first shot cracked from near the barn, not from the attackers, but from the stranger. It struck the ground ahead of the lead horse, close enough to throw dirt against its legs. The animal reared. The line of riders broke. In the confusion, the widow fired from the house, not to kill, but to push them away from the porch. The sound of her shotgun rolled across the yard like thunder trapped between hills. What followed was brief, violent, and confused, as most real gunfights were. Later retellings would stretch it into legend, but the truth was likely uglier and faster. Smoke, frightened horses, men shouting names, revolvers fired too quickly, and bodies seeking cover behind barrels, posts, and walls. The stranger moved from shadow to shadow with disciplined restraint. He did not waste shots. He did not expose himself for glory. One attacker fell near the corral with a wound to the shoulder. Another dropped his pistol and crawled behind a wagon. A third tried to circle toward the house and was stopped by a bullet that split the porch rail inches from his face. The widow saw everything through smoke and fear. Her hands shook as she reloaded. This was the land she had defended through grief, drought, and hunger, now turned into a killing ground before breakfast. The myth of the West often makes violence look clean, but for those who lived it, violence was noise, panic, splinters, blood on dust, and the sickening knowledge that survival might require acts from which the soul did not easily recover. When the shooting stopped, 2 of Creed's men were wounded. 1 horse was down, and the others had fled into the fog. The stranger stood in the yard, revolver lowered, listening for movement. The widow stepped onto the porch with the shotgun still in her hands. Neither spoke at first. The barn had not burned. The cattle had not been taken. The ranch still stood. But the matter was not finished. By noon, the wounded men had been taken into town under guard of neighbors who had finally decided that silence had lasted long enough. Their courage may have come late, but it came. Public violence had changed the balance. A private campaign could be ignored. A failed armed raid could not be buried as easily, especially when injured men could name who had sent them. The sheriff rode out that afternoon with a face tight from political discomfort. He asked the stranger for his name. The stranger gave none that anyone recorded. The sheriff looked at the widow, at the bullet marks, at the injured horse, at the ruined hay shed still black from the earlier fire. Law had arrived only after resistance had made inaction embarrassing. Creed denied involvement at first. Men like him rarely ordered crimes in words that could be repeated under oath. But the wounded riders were not loyal enough to carry blame alone. One named the foreman. Another admitted they had been promised payment and protection. Within days, the pressure on Creed became visible. Not pure justice, perhaps, but consequence. The county could tolerate intimidation. It could tolerate land hunger. It could even tolerate corruption. But it could not tolerate a range boss whose violence had become too public to defend. The widow did not become rich. The ranch did not become safe forever. No single gunfight repaired the structures that made her vulnerable. Weak courts, distant government, gendered assumptions, concentrated land power, and a culture that often confused armed strength with moral right. But she kept her land. That mattered. In frontier communities, survival itself could be a verdict. As for the stranger, he remained only briefly. He helped bury the dead horse, reset the damaged gate, and patch the porch rail where a bullet had torn through the wood. The widow offered payment. He refused most of it, accepting only coffee, ammunition, and a strip of dried beef for the road. She asked where he would go. He looked east first, then west, as if neither direction offered belonging. In the stories that followed, people tried to give him a past. Some claimed he had lost a wife in a raid years earlier and could not bear to see another woman dispossessed. Others said he had once taken land from weaker people himself and was trying, too late, to settle a debt no court could measure. A few believed he was simply a hired gun who chose for once not to be hired by the powerful. None of these explanations can be proven. Perhaps the truth died with him somewhere beyond the county line. Perhaps he understood that a name could turn a man into a target, while namelessness allowed him to move where conscience sent him. The widow lived on the ranch for years afterward, according to the strongest versions of the account. The creek continued to run through dry summers. Fences were cut again from time to time, but never with the same confidence. Neighbors who had once looked away began to stop by more often. Some came out of respect. Some came out of guilt. Some came because they had seen that one person standing firm could expose the weakness of men who ruled by fear. Her story belongs to the larger history of the West, a history more complicated than the legends built from it. The frontier was not merely a stage for duels and heroic riders. It was a place of displacement, ambition, lawmaking, lawbreaking, settlement, exploitation, resilience, and loss. Women ran ranches, defended claims, negotiated credit, buried children, fought loneliness, and endured forms of pressure that rarely entered official histories. Their survival was often quieter than a gunfight, but no less demanding. The nameless gunslinger, if he existed as the stories describe him, was not the whole meaning of the event. He was the spark people remembered because violence leaves bright marks in memory. But the deeper force was the widow's refusal to disappear. Before he arrived, she had already held the line. She had already told powerful men no. She had already stayed when fear gave her every reason to leave. That is why the story endured. Not because one man with a revolver solved the West's injustices, but because for a brief moment on a threatened ranch beside a creek. The machinery of intimidation failed. A widow kept what others meant to steal. A powerful man discovered that fear could turn against him. And a stranger without a name rode away carrying less glory than silence, leaving behind only hoofprints, patched fence wire, and the memory of a morning when the land did not change hands. Years later, travelers passing through that country may have seen nothing remarkable. A weathered house, a barn repaired in mismatched boards, cottonwoods bending over water, fence posts leaning under wind. The signs of violence would have faded into the ordinary textures of age. But places remember in ways maps do not. A burned patch of earth grows grass again. A bullet-scarred rail is replaced. A grave sinks lower each winter. Still, beneath the dust, the old struggle remains. In the end, the ranch was not saved by legend. It was saved by endurance, by preparation, by neighbors who finally chose witness over fear, and by one armed stranger whose silence made him larger than any name could have done. The West would continue to produce men like Creed, men who saw emptiness where others had built homes. It would also produce those who resisted them. Widows, farmers, laborers, freedmen, immigrants, indigenous survivors, small ranchers, and nameless riders moving through the margins of recorded history. The story closes not with triumph, but with a door still standing against the wind. Inside, a woman who had been expected to surrender continued to live by the rhythm of work. Outside, the creek moved through the grass as it had before the threats, before the fire, before the gun smoke. And somewhere beyond the last fence line, the stranger became what frontier memory often made of men who arrived at the edge of disaster and vanished before thanks could become history. Not a hero carved clean from myth, but a shadow cast by a violent age, remembered because, when the powerful came to take what was not theirs, he woke, rode out, and made them answer.